Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, take a fork in the road to the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Inside is a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and how Christopher Marlowe and Francis Bacon joined forces with the Pope, the Dalai Lama, and Bigfoot to assassinate Shakespeare and steal his identity. In a corner table by the fire are three people. One of them thinks that was a pretty solid joke. The other one, not so much. And the one who thought it was a solid joke is me, Matthew Mellema, and welcome to Believe to See. We are a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. The Anselm Society is an organization across the Front Range of Colorado dedicated to a renaissance of the Christian imagination. To find out more, please visit us at anselmsociety.org. And to rate and review the show, please rate and review it on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And now, for this episode, I'm pretty excited about it. I would say it's a long time coming, but no, we like to really leave our guests in suspense. I will introduce one of our co-hosts, Mandy Hauk.
Hello.
Mandy.
Hi, Matthew.
How are you doing?
I am good. I'm just, I might need to put on some protective gear.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see. You're saying you're going to be Switzerland during this, but I've already seen some un-Switzerland-like behavior from you. I get the feeling you're favoring the other person unfairly.
Well, I do
Natural bias.
I do like the other person better than you. Sorry.
Gosh, that's really tough to hear. Okay, so why don't you introduce the other person?
The other person is my younger daughter, Bethany Lee Hauk. She's a pediatric nurse at the Children's Hospital, and she is opinionated.
All of these things are true.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to the table, Bethany.
Thank you.
Yes. So we've been bandying about this topic for a little bit, me and Mandy.
You know what? I realized I only said, there's more that needs to be said about Miss Bethany.
Oh,
okay.
no.
Yes.
Because she has been in theater since she was 8.
The look on Bethany's face right now is
She
great.
was so afraid of what I was going to say. So her very first role was Mustard Seed in Midsummer Night's Dream. She has done Shakespeare camp pretty much every summer through middle school and high school. Mm-hmm. She is a voracious reader, and her favorite book is Jane Eyre, yes?
Favorite classic, yes.
Favorite classic is Jane Eyre. So she's not, she's a nurse and pediatric nurse and also an extreme art lover and literature lover.
I'm not just a crazy, conspiracy theorist.
Not just a
not
crazy
just.
conspiracy
I mean,
theory.
they're not
But that's part of it.
Yeah, it's just part of the larger package.
Yeah, it's a whole thing.
I think it's important to say, though, that I'm
just
usually
asking
do
questions.
not subscribe to conspiracy
No, not
theories.
at all. Not at all.
But this one, there's a lot of proof.
There's proof.
Okay, well.
I'm trying to be Swiss.
But you both raised some nice points. Okay, so let's back up a half step before charging right in.
Yeah.
So once again, theme of this year for Anselm is why we create, looking at different dimensions of us as humans subcreating within God's creation. So the aspect we're looking at in the month of June is time, and particularly, we're going to look at time through the lens of Shakespeare, particularly Shakespeare's The Tempest. That's what our pub night's going to be about coming up, so look for some tickets if they're still out there. Grab them up quick. So last episode, we talked a little bit about time, and now we are talking about Shakespeare. And when we were bandying about different things to talk about, Mandy comes through and says we should talk about anti-Stratfordians. Those people who believe that someone other than Shakespeare... I did not say those people. Those people.
Yeah. The people.
You people. You all. Yeah.
I know. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Again, not very Swiss so far.
Who believe... The people who believe that someone other than Shakespeare, or someone's other than Shakespeare, wrote the plays commonly attributed to him. Mm-hmm. So we want to talk a little bit about that, especially since Bethany may dabble around the fringes of this thing. She has her tinfoil hat on, and she's ready to go. But more importantly, and something we can all agree on, regardless of whether we're right or whether we're Bethany, is that the phenomenon of looking for other explanations for Shakespeare is really interesting, and I think tells us a lot about story, the stories we humans tell ourselves, and I just think it is a worthwhile thing to begin with. So let me sort of lay my cards on the table here. I also am interested in studying sort of weird theories. I believe very, 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 very few of them, but I like reading them because I kind of like to see how people can come to different points of view. They're fun to entertain. I'll go ahead and let you know. I think more likely than not, the Patterson-Gimlin footage is genuine. So there, I've told you my craziest conspiracy theory, non-conspiracy
what
theory.
footage is that? Is that the JFK? Wait, what's the Patterson? Help me.
That's the video of Bigfoot taken in Bluff Creek.
Lordy.
What? Oh, wow.
That's a whole other. You know what? My sister believes in Bigfoot, so we'll have her on next time, and I will argue with the two of you.
Okay, I might be destroying my credibility as we speak, but I'm not saying Bigfoot still exists. I think that the creature captured on that footage is more likely than not what it appears to be.
Oh, okay. Rather than some dude in a costume.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I can give you a whole 10-hour lecture series on that if you'd like.
But Shakespeare and Bigfoot don't really jive.
Or do they?
And that's what we're going to be talking about.
So the point of that is, I enjoy entertaining conspiracy theories, even when I don't happen to buy them. This is a conspiracy theory that I do not remotely buy, but I will happily have this discussion with Bethany, who will be playing the part of what I would play in the Bigfoot discussion. So Bethany,
yes.
Let's give your thesis statement. What do you think is going on with Shakespeare? Who wrote those Shakespeare plays?
So, my original thought on this, before I did deep research, I had listened to one podcast and they talked about it for 20 minutes, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And that's why my mom was introduced to the theory, was because I was telling her about it. And this was a few years ago, but I never looked into it anymore until I was asked to be on this podcast.
24 hours ago.
Yes. So the original theory was that Francis Bacon was the author of all of Shakespeare's works. However, from the research that I did today, I would change that to say
Marlowe.
No, actually, Christopher Marlowe is not involved in my theory whatsoever.
That's the coolest one because it involves Marlowe faking his own death. Anyway, keep going.
I love people faking their deaths.
Yeah.
So the new theory is Francis Bacon wrote all of Shakespeare's plays, and Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, wrote the sonnets.
Okay, so those are two of the more popular candidates, absolutely. Marlowe being another one of the most popular candidates.
Ben Jonson is too, right?
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
Yes, he is. So you wanted me to lay out the sort of accepted view, I believe, so I will do that. I will explain why I believe Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare. So in general, Shakespeare writing, late 1500s, early 1600s, dies 1616. In his life, there's the normal attributions to him that we would expect from any other author of the period. These sort of attributions, like the title pages of the works, the way other authors of the time talk about him, the sort of things you would expect from someone who actually wrote his plays, the sort of things why we believe Ben Jonson wrote his plays, why we believe, Christopher Marlowe wrote his plays and his poetry. This is just widely accepted and was completely accepted without question by all of his contemporaries until we get to the mid-19th century. And what's going on here? Well, first of all, Shakespeare's reputation has changed in the interim. When Shakespeare died, he was considered a really great playwright and a great author. But he was considered one great author among many. So he was considered as basically a peer of Ben Jonson. They're both great. Who's to say who's the best? But as time went on, Shakespeare's reputation keeps growing. Whereas, so by the time we get to maybe the late 1700s, sort of round of plays goes across England, and suddenly Shakespeare is viewed as the author. He's the bard. He's the goat.
Yes.
And what's about, within a couple decades of this sort of new heightened standing, something else happens. Victorians take over, and Victorians are notoriously class conscious. So they take a look at this middle-class kid whose parents could barely even scrape together a coat of arms. His father was a merchant, and he didn't even go to university. He may have gone to some, sort of parochial school or whatever. So this little punk this unwashed rabble wrote Shakespeare? I don't think so. So we get these Victorian snobs who start hatching theories about maybe someone who's a little bit fancier, a little bit more like me. Okay, let's look at the roles of Eton and Balliol. Okay, here's some people. So they start getting these candidates, and eventually, as of now, over 80 people have been put forward as candidates for Shakespeare. I will say, I believe even the most ardent anti-Stratfordian. Anti-Stratfordian is sort of the umbrella term for people who don't believe Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare. Okay. At least 79 of those 80 have to be incorrect. I merely think that 80 out of 80 are not correct. Let me give you another... So that is one line of thinking. Another line of thinking is later advances that have happened in computer analysis of texts. Whereas we've seen a lot of people put forward other writers. So Ben Jonson, Chris Marlowe, just throwing a name out of the air, Francis Bacon. So we are able to look at texts now with the help of computers that somebody writes, and because of small things in the grammar, like the number of prepositions we use, the phraseology, all these tiny little things that nobody notices, can predict what one author wrote as compared to another, unknown passage with incredible accuracy. So people have done this with Shakespeare and compared it to the works of like Francis Bacon, Ben Jonson, down the road. Looking at all of his plays, they found, first of all, the plays are the result of a single author. So these theories that say that Shakespeare's like a group of people, that's disproven, essentially. Second, it doesn't line up with any of the other common authors. So it's not Francis Bacon, it's not Ben Jonson, it's not Chris Marlowe, it's some other person who is there. So basically based on the fact that I will summarize with my opening statement. One, the fact that the things that we use to determine authorship for any other person are clearly there with Shakespeare, as they are for any other author. Two, the fact that he was a pretty well-known figure in his scene, and there was never a single hint or suggestion of it. No one even suspected anyone else until 2.5 centuries later. Three, the fact that later computer technology has confirmed that these are written by one mind, and this mind was not any of the 80 people put forward. That would be my opening statement. Okay, Bethany, now you can go do whatever you're gonna do.
Well, I would first like to agree that it is a very classist idea to assume that it wasn't him automatically. And I think that is the main reason, I would agree that that's the main reason that people don't think that it was Shakespeare, is based on the classism of it.
Their impulse is to be classist.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I will say that I will mention some things based on that, but it is not in a way to be classist. It's just I'm not saying that I don't think someone who is a farmer could have all of these ideas and things like that. I will just say that...
I just want you to know my farmer relatives may be listening to this, but keep going, keep going.
Okay, so I'm going to start with why I think it's not Shakespeare, and then I'm going to go into why I think it is the other two people that I mentioned. So first, like you said, his parents were farmers. They were married by farmers. They weren't even married by townspeople. There's no record of him going to grammar school, but that's not proof against him because there were just no records of the grammar school, so there wouldn't be records even if he did go. However, it's not he would not just have to be like generally literate. People say he could have gone to grammar school later and learned things. That's fine. And he probably would have had to if he was going to be an actor and contributor to the theater like he did end up being as the actual person. But he would have also needed to know translations to Latin and Italian, and the vocabulary for Shakespeare's works is estimated to be anywhere from 17,500 words to 29,000 words. Now this is supposedly coming from someone who has no letters, no records of any letters or signed manuscripts. The only thing we have is 6 signatures from him, and all of them spell his surname differently than it's spelled in his literary works, which is an argument towards why that could be a pseudonym, because it's not necessary. They were using his name as inspiration for the pseudonym rather than trying to say.
Rather than trying to say it's this guy. And
Mandy, are you agreeing with your daughter? You're Switzerland. You're Switzerland.
Fill my sentence.
clarifying.
Switzerland doesn't clarify.
Oh, okay.
Now,
I'll just take my microphone off.
now, what you said about him being regarded as a peer among other writers at the time, they all acknowledged him in that way. That's fine. I would say, though, if he was regarded as this amazing author during his lifetime, then it's interesting that there are no eulogies or any poems memorializing his death until 7 years after he died. And so the more modern authors that would agree that it probably was not Shakespeare.
So the other what's the word?
Anti-Stratfordians.
Ones that are much more educated than me would consist of, not limited to, but Mark Twain, Walt Whitman, Sigmund Freud, Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Henry James. And I believe Malcolm X was on that list as well. And one of their main reasons for believing this was the 6 signatures that we do have. Essentially, what they say is they look like someone who is not familiar with a pen, which again would be fine and does seem like a classist argument. However, at the time, because there were a lot of people, the majority of people weren't as literate. People who were highly literate, they took it as a point of pride. So they had very distinct, pretty-looking signatures, and that was like a point of pride for them. So it's very interesting that this well-known, very highly respected author didn't have a nice-looking signature. And there are only 6 that we have of record.
Nope.
And his house was up until 1640. So the excuses surrounding why there would be no record of his works, of maybe they just couldn't find them, or the house was destroyed, or things like that. His house was up until 1640, so that would be, I can't do math, 26 years after he died?
24.
20, yes, thank you, 24.
Point for my side.
I can't do math. So those are any questions so far, basically.
Well, let's let Switzerland do this. So Switzerland, I'm going to change metaphors completely. You're the jury now.
I'm the jury.
So the way we do trials in Colorado is after each witness, we do the direct examination, cross-examination, then we ask, does the jury have any questions? How did I get so correct? I'm not sure. I just read.
So when you say there were no letters at the time, so you mentioned there were no letters or records of his work, and then also that he wasn't eulogized until
there were
7 years.
There were no eulogies or memorializations of him until 7 years after he died.
Does that differ from what would have been standard? Were other, was Francis Bacon eulogized immediately?
I did not have enough time to look that far into the subject.
Oh, okay.
Excellent question, though, Mandy.
Thank you.
And I'm not just trying to win brownies.
I was curious about that.
Because that's automatically if they're saying this did not exist for this person, I want to know, should it have?
Right.
Would it have been common that it would have?
I would assume, based on the fact that it's an argument, that it's abnormal.
And for sure, I know that typically we have letters from Flannery O'Connor. There's books of letters. So typically, so it sounds like you're saying the argument is if he were really a writer, he would be writing.
Well, especially since he lived far away from his family for a period of time when he was pursuing the theater, you would think he would have written letters home to his wife or children or things like that.
That is true.
Unless they also weren't literate, because there's also no proof that his daughters were literate. So you would think that if he he would have taught his daughters. There's 2 signatures from his oldest daughter, and that's all we got.
Okay. Well, I need to have a question for Matthew now.
Well, while you're thinking, I would like to do some rebuttal.
Of course,
go for it.
Okay, so First of all, as to the letters, it is true that there aren't as many letters from Shakespeare as we would see from like other men of the day. But this can actually be explained really easily. One, his middle-class background actually does make sense here. He didn't go to university, didn't go to get some fancy education. He didn't have fancy like sons of dukes as his friends. So not the sort of people who would maintain correspondence with. There's no reason to believe his wife was literate. There's, like you said, there's reason to doubt whether his daughters were even literate. So there's, from the get-go, he's the sort of person who may not have written as many letters to begin with. And second, when you just keep into account that of the vast swaths of letters that were sent, very, very few remain. And a lot of the ones that we were able to recover from, other figures, they may be recovered through happenstance. So based on the small percentage of these things that endure to begin with, the fact that Shakespeare may have had fewer to start off with, it's really not surprising that he had fewer no letters that we've been able to collect. To the fact that there were no memorials to him until several years after. Once again, Shakespeare was a well-regarded playwright, but he wasn't like the rock star playwright. He was one respected playwright among many, and he was lower class than most of the others. Like Ben Jonson and Marlowe had fancy educations. Shakespeare didn't. He was solidly middle class, and he died middle class, right? Didn't he famously leave his second best bed to his wife?
Yes.
I was going to mention that.
So you could also indicate maybe that's another reson why he didn't write back home very often.
That is one of my points that I forgot to mention because it was on a separate piece of paper. But there are no mentions of his works or anything in his will.
And that leads me to another sort of main point here. And I think a lot of folks thinking about great artists post-Romanticism, post-Coleridge, post-Wordsworth. The poet is the great man, the sort of Byronic hero out among whose like whole identity is being a poet or whatever. Shakespeare grew up in a different world where being in the theater, being a playwright, was sort of a workaday profession. Theaters weren't especially fancy. That wasn't plays that Shakespeare wrote weren't necessarily considered high art at the time. They were for the masses. They were kind of what we'd consider movies. So he may not have conceived himself as like a fancy artist. He was sort of a workaday guy. Some people, are carpenters. Some people sell wool. I write plays. Okay. So that whole self-conception, I think, could be an explanation for why you don't see he didn't bequeath any folios of his work to anybody or anything like that. He may not have envisioned himself that way.
Okay.
Your mom just said,
If it was his profession, though, don't you think he would have viewed it as some sort of asset that he would want to do something with in his world?
Well, not necessarily. If you're like, hey,
I'm asking you as a genuine question because you're a lawyer and I'm not. So.
If I had half-finished manuscripts, I would not necessarily want to pass them on to anybody when I died. I might say, hey, Danielle, this first draft that I have of this work, burn it. It's the first draft, so it sucks. Burn it.
But what's your answer to how would he have gotten that large of a vocabulary? What's your answer to the
understanding
education?
of different languages? And I also, you might like this, which I don't see it on the note paper, but I remembered while you were talking about it. It's right here. When you mentioned the jury,
yes.
I remembered that there are no legal errors in any of his works.
Good for
So
him.
it would have to be someone who had a knowledge of the inner workings of the court and the law. Francis Bacon was a lawyer.
Yeah, unlike Leif Anger, who apparently really
Leif Anger fails. Leif Anger fails.
See how easy it is to make a legal error?
If you think about how many court scenes and things like that there are in Shakespeare's works, you would think a regular old farmer guy would have messed something up in that.
So a couple answers to that.
Yeah.
First of all, Shakespeare's plays do reveal some knowledge of other languages, of the inner workings of courts, of aristocrats, of the law, of all these different things. Again, the single author, and we do know from the computer analysis it was a single author, clearly had a broad breadth of knowledge here. But again, I think it's a category error to assume because Shakespeare didn't have a fancy university education that he couldn't have learned these things on his own. He was in London, which was, major city. He'd come in contact with a lot of important people through his work. He'd play before aristocrats. He'd play before members of royalty. He'd be able to talk to people. He'd be able to read on his own. If Shakespeare was who we say he was a genius. And I think a genius person, even if they're from the great unwashed, could be able to learn all these things and actually learn them pretty well. You'll see a lot of authors today who really take a deep dive onto specific areas. Like, even as a grumpy lawyer, there's some legal thrillers who get all the law right because they just put in the legwork necessary. So I think it's not at all difficult to postulate that Shakespeare could have read various books about it, talked to different people, gotten input from different people, and learned that to piece it all together well enough.
Okay.
Oh, she has this smile right now that I don't trust.
Well, just because I am very excited because I'm about to go into why it could be the other people that I mentioned.
Okay, let's do it. Let's take the plunge into Bacon and Edward de Vere.
Yes.
Wait, is it de Vere or de Vere?
It's De Vere.
De Vere.
I believe. I don't know. I've only heard it said.
I've only
in a
read
British
it.
accent, so couldn't tell you.
Well, then that's more correct.
By the way, have you ever seen videos of Shakespeare performed in like the original accent of the time?
Yes.
It's so cool.
Weird. It's
It's
cool,
so cool. It sounds like more Scottish almost, like modern day Scottish.
Yeah.
It's a lot earthier.
Yeah. Well, the dialects changed by the time Francis Bacon died. So.
Oh, whoa. Okay. So let's get to Bacon.
So Francis Bacon, he was involved in Freemasons, which is a secret society, and
We've all seen National Treasure.
Yes. Well, I haven't.
It's not a national treasure. You can skip it.
So, let's see. I'm trying to figure out where to start. It's a little bit overwhelming. So, one of the main things. So, he believed that Athena told him in a dream to write in secret and, quote, forego popular applause. And basically, he viewed that as his whole goal was to advance the literacy of the time, but not do it under his own name. And if you think about it, that goal was achieved. There were a lot of invented words in Shakespeare's works. And I think the main reason why we think that it could be these people and why that would make sense would be they would want to write under someone else's name if they had this sort of goal. So Francis Bacon having the goal of advancing the literacy at the time, if you think about it from the perspective of nowadays, if someone that was like high in the government was trying to write something to educate people, we would kind of brush that off and be like, okay, well, this is, propaganda and things like that. So that's why that would be the goal of them writing under another name, because that's one thing that people question is, well, why these two people, or even just Francis Bacon, like, why would he even want to write under another name? Because people already knew who he was. But that's kind of the point. There's also a fun little, this isn't really a huge proof, but I think it's kind of fun. The main portrait that we know of Shakespeare is there's a small line drawn from his chin to his ear, which makes it look like a mask. And there is, I believe it's Ben Jonson. I don't know. These notes are not as.
I'm sorry.
Wow!
Okay.
Wow!
Okay.
Blaming the jury for your notes.
Okay.
Wow!
I wish I had a little bit more time because I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm talking about. But I believe it was a quote from Ben Jonson attributed to that portrait, and it says, "Look not on his picture, but on his book." So, if you think about that, that would mean, okay, maybe it's not the guy in the picture that is a portrait of the actual William Shakespeare, but look on his book. There's also a lecture that I unfortunately couldn't find by a man named Jim Mars, and he decodes a portion of Love's Labour's Lost. And if, for some context, Francis Bacon was very into ciphers and all of that stuff.
Well, that whole secret society
all of the secret
thing.
society, yes, the Freemason and Rosicrucian symbolism. So from a guy that already uses ciphers quite a bit, Jim Mars decoded a piece of Love's Labour's Lost, and I really wish I could have found this so I could have watched it happen and have more information behind it. But basically the cipher ended up saying these plays,
I would like to point out the jury just pointed to the correct note for the opposing counsel here.
She just pointed me to what I was trying to say.
Your Honor, I object.
There is no Your Honor.
Oh,
There's
darn
no
it.
honor.
So the quote that came out of the cipher that he decoded was, "These plays, the offspring of F. Bacon, are preserved for the world." Again, I wish I had more context on the way that he decoded that to say that, but that is the cipher that he decoded, and that is what it said. So that would be my proof behind why Francis Bacon wrote the plays specifically, because it does say in that quote, "These plays, the offspring of F. Bacon, are preserved for the world." So that only references the plays. Are we following? Any questions so far?
Any questions from the jury?
No, I've been smited, so you go ahead.
I'm just pointing out how unfair it is that you seem to be cheering for your daughter over your fellow podcast host.
Always cheer for my daughter.
Fine.
Deal with it.
What you got?
Okay, so first of all, I have a few clarifying questions
Yes,
here.
yes,
Because
I'll do my best.
I was not familiar with the specific permutation where we have Bacon with the plays and De Vere
Yes.
with the poetry.
Yes.
Okay, so first off, what does the theory say is the reason why they both decided to write under the same pseudonym? Why didn't they both pick their own pseudonym?
Ooh, good question.
I don't know.
Oh, it didn't say
Okay. Well, fair enough.
Again, if I had more time, maybe.
We've all agreed to blame Mandy for any.
that. Yes.
But
Yeah, it's my fault.
all right, so other question.
Yes.
So this scene you just described with Athena, did Francis Bacon record this? Like, where did you get the information about this happening?
Unfortunately, again, the proof that I have on the Francis Bacon theory is not as strong, because that was from the 20 minutes that they talked about it in a podcast, and it was all somebody else referencing research that they had done on it. So it wasn't directly from a source, and they didn't say where they got the
So here, I'll tell you sort of big picture, one of my issues with these different theories. So you see the different theories and you look at them and you can usually find some compelling stuff there, but my big picture questions. One, I very rarely see compelling enough reasons for these different people to write under a pseudonym. And even so, why not just write under a pseudonym instead of asking some random hack actor to be this frontman for you? That just seems unnecessarily risky when you could just be by an unknown mystery poet. I've thought about doing that same thing with my writing to make me seem more mysterious. But
don't you think that would have led to more speculation, and people would have tried to figure out who it was rather than them just giving it to this guy who was already involved in the theater scene?
But to me, that's a feature, not a bug. Because if, under this account, Francis Bacon wants to share these thoughts with the populace, wouldn't having this mechanism be who's this mystery writer? That would gin up more interest in your work and further accomplish your goals.
I think what I think is that he and they, and Edward, if we're buying that part, would have, I don't think they wanted a lot of mystery and speculation to be around it. They wanted it to just be there and kind of subconsciously get into the minds of people that liked theater already, if that makes sense. So they didn't want it to be ooh, this is so interesting. What's this mystery guy doing? They'd be oh my gosh, this guy's a genius. We should see all of his plays and, Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Okay, so other question. So Francis Bacon, he's already famous for his writing.
Right.
It's just not fiction writing. So why would he feel the need to use a pseudonym for writing plays about a guy who gets transformed into a donkey, but he doesn't feel that when he's writing, serious philosophical and scientific treatises.
What do you mean?
Like, how come we know Francis Bacon wrote under his own name for like his work on like the scientific method, but not for his plays? Why is that?
Well, like I said, I feel like because the goal was to advance the literacy of the population, that in secret, forego popular applause, he would have, like I said, like if we go by today's standards, if someone who was already famous was trying to like put forth all this stuff to like educate the public, we wouldn't really necessarily buy into it as much as if it was secretly done through art. And not by someone who already had a big name, because they might not necessarily want to buy into that.
But wouldn't the art be the thing regardless of whether it was written by this scientist dude or by this middle-class actor dude?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be the art just be the thing? So why not just, hey, I'm Francis Bacon, I'm this kick-butt scientist, and guess what? I also write killer plays. Here you go.
But what I'm saying is, if it was from someone who was already big in the government and like...
so then people would just do that based on his reputation rather than the play being the thing.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
Cynicism is
Got you.
Is that what you... Yeah.
Okay.
They'd be cynical and not willing to accept
Okay.
And view it more as propaganda rather than art.
I understand your argument. You're wrong, but I understand your argument. Okay. So...
Hey, that's a step. Good job, guys.
All right, so needless to say, if anyone wants to, they can dive into this, and it's really interesting. Again, like whether you're on Bethany's side or the right side, there's plenty of stuff there, and it's really fascinating just to see, delving into Shakespeare's world, the broader world of like Ben Jonson, all these other writers, and just looking into how we attribute authorship. So it's a worthwhile field to study. So what would you before we switch gears to talk about the ramifications of the debate, where would you send people to hear your wrong ideas?
Well, what I was going to say while switching over to the Edward de Vere...
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about him. Let's talk about him, too.
This is the reference that I can actually give, because this is a whole lecture that I watched, and it's where I got all of the information that I'm about to say, and it's from someone who is much more educated than I am. Again, I've only heard his name said in a British accent, but I believe it's Alexander Warr, and he's the president of the Shakespeare Authorship Coalition. And he led a lecture at Brunel University, London, and it's called "Shakespeare is a Fake and I Can Prove It." And it's about an hour and a half long. It's about an hour and a half long, and he is an absolute genius, and I will try my best to give the short version. And there's absolutely no way that I could fully convey all of the things that he does, because he goes through and decodes a bunch of things, and it was fascinating to watch. So anyone who I feel like this is the perfect podcast for, like, this lecture that I watched is perfect for the audience that we already have for the podcast, because it would be art nerds and Jesus nerds.
Awesome.
I love this because he uses a lot of Hermetic theology. And like Christian symbols and things in order to decode this, and it's very, very cool, because the theory basically, codes must be enforced by Christ 3 times or they're invalid, is how he goes into it. So every code and every symbol that he proves is reinforced 3 times within the code. So one thing is, Shakespeare is not buried in Stratford-upon-Avon. The grave site that they have for him is 3 feet wide, 3 feet deep, and 3.5 feet wide. So not big enough.
Well, if you crumple them up a little bit,
Not big enough for a person. There's no coffin in it, just dust. There's nothing in there. They did excavation, nothing in there. So basically, the main point that he goes through is based on decoding the dedication of the sonnets, which is why this is only referencing the sonnets, and Edward de Vere was more of a poet than a writer like Francis Bacon was, so that's why this makes sense as well. And like I said, the only proof that I saw at least comes from the dedication of the sonnets specifically. So he goes through and shows why, shows what points to Edward de Vere being the writer, but also where Shakespeare, who he essentially proves is Edward de Vere, is buried. The tombstone itself, he goes through a code to show that Shakespeare, who we know as Shakespeare, is buried in Westminster Abbey in Poets' Corner. And the dedication of the sonnets, the code that he goes through in that, also enforces this theory. The main symbols that he uses, the main symbol is the chirochristogram, which is an X with a line through it and a P at the top, which is an R, so it's the first 3 letters of Jesus Christ, because the I is Jesus, because there was no J,
Right.
and the X is Christ. It also was really cool because he was talking about how there's the triple tau, which is a symbol that's made out of 3 T's, and it essentially stands for Jesus Christ, and T equals 3, the number 3.
Okay.
So if you put 3 T's together, then it not only represents the Trinity, but it adds up to 9, and IX means Jesus Christ. So he's like, it enforces the Trinity and the fact that like they can be separate, but also they still
Oh, that
mean
is
Jesus
cool.
Christ.
So that was a little
cool.
side note. That
So
didn't-
cool.
Okay.
But he uses these, but it's important because he uses these symbols to decode the dedication of the sonnets.
Okay.
So basically, the main things that he talks about are the number of lines in the dedication. There's 6 lines, then 2 lines, and then 4 lines, which is a reference to the date of Edward de Vere's death. He basically, so he goes through and lays out all of the letters in the dedication, not spaced out by sentences and everything, just all of the letters. And then, separates it into 19 lines, and he explains why he does that. But all of the codes come from that. So there is, I'm not going to be able to explain this as well as he did because he's the one who figured it out and is way smarter than I am. However, basically he goes through and finds that it says De Vere lies here, and South Cross, Isle St. Peter's, and Westminster. And then on the front, there is, it has to do with a lot of geometry and things like that, but there is a way to find exactly where Shakespeare would be buried. You lay it over the map of Westminster Abbey, and it points directly to...
Like the Marauders map. No, I'm kidding.
Sure.
So,
Wait.
Yeah.
so questions based off of that.
Oh, yeah.
Picture that I'm wearing some suspenders. Well, I'm just a simple farmer Shakespeare lover. But to me, here's some of my closing argument points. So, first of all, I get the things with the ciphers, and they do, when you see them laid out by someone who, like, as you pointed out earlier, there's a tradition of very smart, educated people. There's sort of like this subset of folks who are anti-Stratfordians. And you can see why lots of smart people would have these thoughts, especially about, again, we're attributing genius to this sort of normal-looking dude who, you know, left his second best bed to his wife and didn't write letters. Okay, cool, I get that. But with the ciphers, I guess I would say, in response generally, one, I find it kind of dubious from the get-go that these authors who decided, you know, for some, you know, other reasons, that they're going to remain anonymous, to nonetheless hide clues in there. That seems to be defeating the purpose. And 2, if you know what you're doing, if you're a smart dude, knows your way around the computer, I get the feeling you can find ciphers that will do something eventually. You know, like, let's look at the phrase, a 1 in a million coincidence. If you're going to start from the conclusion you want and work backwards at all those million things, by definition, one of those things will be a 1 in a million coincidence. So you can find that and be like, boom, proof. So I think doing that, you can construct a narrative, and it sounds good.
Right.
But ultimately, I think the better one is simply the one that is confirming what was the universal assent of people at the time, and was until all of your snobbish friends got going with that, Bethany. So
So you're the
I'm
Occam's razor
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I just think that applying to Shakespeare the standard that we apply to everyone else, it's a very easy case. And I think this is the genetic fallacy, but I think you can see the other things that are motivating these stories. And then you get some really smart people trying to like reverse engineer the evidence to fit the story they want. That would be my explanation. But now I'm going to stop strumming my suspenders and I will yield the floor to opposing counsel.
So I would agree with you. I was very skeptical about the whole cipher thing just because, like you said, there's ways to find all of this, like in anything. If you have a point to prove, like you can find a way to prove it.
Right.
But what really got me, like I would really encourage you to watch it because I think it'll be interesting to you.
Even not to
if
agree,
you think that it's wrong.
Yeah.
But like the amount of times that
Me and Mandy will watch it together, and Mandy will be like, "Matt, shut up." I'll be like,
like I said, he proves each of the symbols that he goes through multiple times throughout the code, and it's in different pieces and proved in different ways. But essentially, because it's the dedication of the sonnets, what it winds up saying is these sonnets were written by God and the 17th Earl of Oxford, which was Edward de Vere. And there's a lot of syntax issues in the dedication itself. And one point that he makes is a lot of the people that talk about Shakespeare, it's all very cryptic. Which he says the Greek word is kryptein, which means to hide. So he's like, okay, well, what are they hiding? And saying all these cryptic things about him. And he was very suspicious about the syntax issues in the sonnet dedication. He felt like it was pointing towards, and the syntax issues were because they were trying to put the code in, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then one of Edward de Vere's main life mottos, I guess, is what we would call it, is vero nihil verius, which means nothing truer than truth or nothing truer than Vere. And
that was probably what his drinking buddies used to say during the nothing truer than Vere. Am I right, bro?
Like when E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen.
And so because of that, one of his own personal pseudonyms was a double V. And if you look at some of the ways that William Shakespeare was written, the beginning is clearly two V's and not an actual W. It's two V's that aren't touching each other. Okay. So they would think that is a little clue. And the main reason why, because when I originally was going into this, I was like, okay, but there's no way that more than one person wrote Shakespeare's things just because they're all so consistent. The main reason why it would not be able to be just one of these two people is one, because the sonnet dedication shows that it's de Vere, and his actual burial place, so Edward de Vere, how he goes through and finds it, is literally the exact spot where the Shakespeare monument was erected. And the sonnet dedication is in 1609, and that's where it points to the burial place, which would make sense because Edward de Vere died in 1604, so they would have already known where he was buried. And the Shakespeare monument wasn't erected until 1740, but it was just conveniently erected directly over Edward de Vere's burial place.
Did they move his tombstone, or it's just
what?
right? Did Edward not have a tombstone or anything like that?
No. I don't think so.
Oh.
Yeah. Again, I had a limited amount of research.
I know, I'm sorry.
Yeah. But anyway, so the main reason why it could not be just de Vere, because this was all very convincing to me when I watched it. And again, it sounds like very piecemeally when I say it because I didn't go through all of it. But Edward de Vere wouldn't have been able to write the plays because there were several plays that were written after he died. But the last sonnet...
That would be tricky. That would be cool if he had written them after he was dead.
The last...
How often during the day does Mandy make a joke and Bethany gives her that exact look?
The listeners can imagine this.
The last sonnet was written in 1598. Edward de Vere died in 1604. The last play was written in 1613, and Francis Bacon died in 1626. Okay. So that's why
their life.
All right.
The theory that the guy that proposed this was putting forth was that Edward de Vere did all of it, and then Francis Bacon took over when he died. But I don't buy that because, again, like I said, it's too consistent.
Yeah.
So
based on
the information that I have, only the sonnets are quote unquote proven to be by de Vere, and only the plays are proven to be by Bacon based on the ciphers.
Okay, well, there we go. There we go. Well, thank you for your closing counsel.
Thank you.
And now, as we turn it over to the jury, namely Mandy and the rest of the listeners, let's switch gears to sort of maybe the why. And again, regardless of where you come down, you can be as wrong as you want, as I've shown by giving Bethany her say here. But regardless, it's an interesting phenomenon that starting, a couple centuries after Shakespeare was dead, at least, there have been folks who seem to super want Shakespeare to not be the author of the plays. And I think there's other parallels we can see for this in history, where you can see, this event happened, but now there's sort of this, all these sort of upgrowths of conspiracy or other theories around to explain this event that has the surface level, simple explanation.
Right.
So let's start with you, Mandy. Mandy, you have been just a model juror here.
Oh yeah.
Yes, you've shown the utmost discretion in being impartial to both people.
Oh yeah.
Even though you did help your daughter organize her notes.
Yeah.
But Mandy, why do you think there seems to be this impulse by folks to say Shakespeare didn't actually do that?
I actually look at it from both sides. I think it's interesting that there are such passionate feelings on both sides, as you two convey, because I think the implication behind those who lean against it being him. Yes, there are some for whom that was classist, but I think also it's just genius is really hard to absorb, and it's so just the sheer volume of his work is. I don't know. It's hard to accept that all came from one human being. I mean, how old was he when he died?
He's like in his 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I haven't even published one novel. So that right there. No. And so
And that's why she's an
That's why, because I don't want it to be true. Because and there's probably part of that. Like maybe some people don't want it to be true because they don't want, what does that say about them? There can be a little bit of shame involved if you look at someone else's accomplishments as being so enormous, and that can't be true, because if that's true, then wow, what does that say about my puny little life? But then on the other side, I think some people just need it to be, they like you, the pro Stratfordian.
Whoa.
I don't know. Anyway, just the passion to me is what's interesting, because the people who passionately reject any idea that it could be anyone other than Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, the actor, they want to protect the myth, the legend, the heroism, the what?
I said the bard.
The bard, yes. And so I'm not kidding. Like, I don't know. I don't. When Bethany talks, I'm like, oh yeah. But then when you talk, I go, oh yeah, true. And so
Notice her voice doesn't sound as excited when I'm talking.
I just meant, oh yeah, that's right versus, oh yeah, that's wrong. That was the reason for my voice. Right versus wrong. Okay. Anyway, so the reason that I even proposed this as a topic was really just to talk about why are people so passionate on both sides? Yeah. And then you're the one who decided maybe you should argue with Bethany about it.
Well, and I think I would like to make it known that I'm not in any way opposed to it being like the actual Shakespeare.
Right.
Like, I think that would be so cool. Yeah. And like I'm not opposed to that at all. I just once I started looking into this, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, because you just ran across it. You didn't have an opinion.
I didn't seek it out. And I think the reason why, another reason why people on Matt's side get a little bit defensive about it is because is because they take it as like an affront on, or at least I'll give another example of like my director in high school loves Shakespeare. She did not want to hear anyone saying anything about anyone else potentially writing it because she was defensive of his work.
Of him. Yeah.
Because she loves his work. And I'm going to be talking
to her in a few weeks for a podcast.
And I think it's really important to say that like it changes nothing about how brilliant and amazing and society changing and contributing to how our world even is today his work is. And the work of like Shakespeare is so legendary.
Right.
It doesn't matter who wrote it. It just is. Mm-hmm. So I think some people get defensive because they think we're attacking like
him,
the
as a
work.
Person.
No,
the
you
work. Think. Oh, okay.
That's at least how Nancy goes about it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I love you, Nancy, if you're listening.
Yeah.
But like either way, it doesn't matter who wrote it. The work is still as genius and society.
It doesn't tarnish the work
changing as
to you
it was.
to think. Right.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So for me, if I may speak in my own defense, I will admit this is one of the topics where I get a little like, I wouldn't say defensive, but I get a little like, the premise sort of gets under my skin, and it's because of the classist element to it. Oh, again, I'm not saying you yourself are classist, Bethany.
Yeah, but a lot of the reasoning behind why people question it in the first place.
Exactly. A lot of people start questioning in the first place because, some little middle class guy from the middle of nowhere. It's like
they didn't want it to be true that he could do it.
Surely only an Oxford man could, So that's one of the reasons it gets under my skin. It's sort of the reason why the ancient aliens conspiracy theory gets under my skin. It's like, we can't imagine how ancient people could build these pyramids, so clearly it was pyramids. It was aliens. Like, no, they were just better at engineering than you, bro. It's okay. So that's why this is one that sort of gets under my skin, is because originally there were elements of that. But I will say in the abstract, I'm totally open to assigning other authorship things because, my main area of nerdery is ancient literature. So that's all that we do. It's like, was Homer one dude or was he like a collection of people? It was sort of from an oral tradition, got amalgamated, and it's like, who knows? But the Iliad's still awesome either way, or like Gilgamesh or whatever. So I'm fine in theory with it being like, maybe this is the thing. But so that is where I come down on that. So if you are like a Duke listening to this and you don't think Shakespeare could do this because he's middle class, well, me and you have a problem. But I think to the larger point, why these things grow up when they do. Like let's look at another example where conspiracy theories thrive. The assassination of JFK.
Yeah.
It's because I heard somebody explain this once. I think it was really good, where there's sort of a mismatch. You have JFK, who maybe in part because he died so young, is sort of this image of American hope and optimism, Camelot, ask not what your country can do for you, all that stuff. This dude who's so awesome, and he gets killed by some schmuck. Right? Just some dude with a rifle.
Weirdo.
This random weirdo. Like, that shouldn't... There's a mismatch there. Like, some random dude shouldn't be able to kill the coolest dude on the planet.
Yeah, it should be something much more monumental.
If JFK's going to die, it has to be a big conspiracy.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think we can apply that sort of thing to Shakespeare. Part of it, I think, is... who was it? Some writer, you coined the term like bardolatry, where it's like we have elevated Shakespeare to like this level that he's so far above others.
Right.
Sort of like the way that my dad would talk about Michael Jordan compared to other basketball players.
Well, in that he was correct.
Oh, we've already had a debate about this. but like there's sort of this difference between who's the best basketball player of all time and who's the GOAT. Michael's the GOAT.
Continue.
Whether or not, say, like LeBron James or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, they may they may be, Mandy,
Yeah.
better basketball players, but in the popular consciousness, in the way we conceive of a great basketball player, in the public imagination, Michael's the GOAT. He will always be the GOAT no matter what, forever and ever. Same thing with Shakespeare. Have there been other authors since who've been just better writers than Shakespeare? Maybe even probably, right? But Shakespeare occupies such a unique position in the popular imagination. To take one example of many, this great course I just started the other day, it's called Great Authors of the Western Literary Tradition. Guess who's on the cover? There's the bard himself. Like when you think, yes, when you think of great authors in our context, Shakespeare is the quintessential example. Yeah. Just like Michael Jordan, he will always be the GOAT.
Yes.
So
I don't think I ever thought I would hear Michael Jordan compared to William Shakespeare, but here I am.
They're both goats.
You don't listen to enough of the podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
We go in these directions.
Comes up surprisingly often.
You really need to watch the musical. Something
I was gonna say.
Yes. Go ahead, tell him.
It's so good. If anyone likes Shakespeare, you will.
It is bawdy, but so is Shakespeare.
The more that I watch it and listen to it, the more it moves up in my.
Where would they be able to see it? Would they have to have Broadway HD?
No, you'd have to watch an illegal bootleg.
Oh, you would have to watch an illegal bootleg. We are not.
There is no
promoting.
Let me talk. There is no professional recording available to the public, which is a crime because it is not still running. So just give it to us, please. Right. But that is my defense towards it being okay that I watched it is because there's no way else for me to see it. So I'm not.
From a legal perspective. We are not telling our listeners to go listen.
Regardless.
You can access the soundtrack on Spotify.
There you go. Okay.
But it is about these two writers, the Bottom brothers. You might already see the Shakespearean reference. Who are there? It's a writer and a director, and they're brothers, and they are trying to make it big during the time of Shakespeare. And so this play kind of goes against what you were saying of like he was kind of just the same as everyone else as he was writing. They're like it's showing how hard it was for them to make it big because everyone loves Shakespeare. And Shakespeare is portrayed as this like rock star, like. Hoity-toity. Yeah.
It's hard to be the bard. Yes. Is one of the songs.
And he's played by my favorite musical theater actor of all time, Christian Borle.
Yeah. The best song, I think, though, is Willpower.
Yes. There's the writers of this
exactly
play are just so genius. There's so much wordplay.
Well, and one of the songs is in iambic pentameter.
Yep.
Ooh, there we go.
You gotta
There's
listen.
an insane amount of wordplay, and the plot in itself is similar to the plot of a Shakespearean play because there's like soothsayers, there's women dressing up as men, there's a play within a play, there's a court scene. So it's very much nodding towards like a Shakespearean plot in itself. It's just genius.
Right. But that you were just reminding me of that because of your talk about him being the GOAT. Because that's the way it's portrayed there.
Yes.
Well,
inaccurately.
and it sounds like again historically it's not accurate, but their point is I'm guessing the author of that play would be like, this is sort of Shakespeare in our modern conception of him. Exactly.
Oh, absolutely. Like how do you top Shakespeare?
So when you have this sort of elevated plane where Shakespeare's at, and you compare it to his relatively normal life where again he's just like a workaday dude, you see that same mismatch. It's like the most awesome writer of all time can't be this guy. There has to be something exciting like a conspiracy or a fake death or maybe it's the queen or there has to be something else.
Right. Yeah, and I just think the only way for it to have been William Shakespeare the actor is for him to be, as you said, an absolute genius. That's the only way it's possible. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we conclusively solved the debate, right, Mandy? You decided I won, and that's very nice. And
I'm sorry, I'm polishing up my final glass.
To where she said, "I don't know."
I don't recall that. But anyway,
are you allowed to disregard jury findings?
What?
This is a mistrial.
From the recording.
This was a mistrial. The jury could not come to an agreement with itself, even though it was only one person.
I'm going to talk to the editor and make sure that this gets spliced together in the right way afterwards. But anyway, Bethany and Mandy, thank you both for joining us. This was super fun.
Yeah.
And as you all can probably tell, things are winding down at the Anselm Society Digital Pub. The fire's down to embers. Customers are trundling home. You've polished off your final glass. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.